I'm Will Morris, and welcome to Global Tax Talks Tax in 60 Seconds. In the 2 weeks that 60 Seconds was off the air, the big news was that the UN wrapped up its session in New York on the draft Terms of Reference, or TOR, for a new tax convention. The negotiations culminated on August 16th in a non-consensus TOR that will set the stage for future negotiations. But what does this all add up to? A tax earthquake, as reported in some parts of the tax press? Well, not so far. Most of the world's largest economies voted against or abstained from voting on the TOR, for example, the US and the UK, the EU, and Canada. The adopted TOR highlights the fair allocation of taxing rights as a principal commitment under the Convention. But the glaring disconnect, at least so far, between developed and developing countries does not necessarily bode well for any enduring or effective outcomes. One of the reasons for this UN effort is the dissatisfaction at the OECD among developing countries for its supposedly high-handed ways. But the lack of consensus at the end of these UN meetings and the treatment that some of the developed countries perceive themselves as receiving runs the risk of creating mirror issues/problems to those created by the OECD process. The feature of the UN is majority voting, and despite an expressed desire to reach consensus, in the end, on a straightforward numbers basis, many of the world's most economically significant countries were on the losing end of the vote. But the UN, no more than the OECD, can impose its will on those countries that choose not to sign up. So where does this go? Well, obviously it's too early to say, although there are concerns that increased withholding taxes on cross-border services and possibly more DSTs and wealth taxes could be on the cards. But for the moment, an intergovernmental negotiating committee will likely meet for at least 3 sessions per year until 2027, with the goal of submitting the final framework convention and 2 priority protocols to the General Assembly by September 2027. But, again, it's not entirely clear what the way forward is. As the US observed before voting no, without a clear commitment to finding consensus-based solutions and maximizing the number of implementing jurisdictions, we see a clear risk that this project may lead to further fragmentation of the international tax system. And the EU, another large economic bloc which abstained, made similar observations. Fundamentally, I think the big question is whether a single global tax organization or a single global tax standard is even achievable. Unlike, for example, nuclear weapons treaties where each side gives up something, or climate treaties where everyone needs to act to achieve any improvement, tax is different. Back in 2017, at the beginning of this project, I observed that if there were winners in BEPS 2.0, then by definition there had to be losers. So maybe some fragmentation is inevitable. Maybe a cohesive UN of developing countries and a cohesive OECD of developed countries will prove to be more stable than any efforts to construct one single group. We'll see. Anyway, thanks for tuning in, and come back next week so that you stay global tax ready.